Hello and welcome to another tier list video. Today we are taking a look at the Black Ops 1 weapons, but as it pertains to the zombies game mode. So going to be ignoring how strong or weak they are in multiplayer and just going to be looking at how effective are they in zombies. And I'm also going to be considering the Pack-a-Punch variant of the weapon as well. How good is that? Does it make the gun viable? Things like that. So starting us off, we have the M1911. This is the starter pistol. And you know, as all starter pistols in all zombies games, it's pretty garbage. That being said, if you do pack-a-punch this, you get the Akimbo, Mustang, and Sally, and you know, that basically shoots grenades out of each of your pistols. So pack-a-punched, this is one of the better guns in the game in my opinion. You do burn through ammo pretty quick even when it's pack-a-punch, but it's still incredibly strong, feels really good to use, and you got a pistol so you can run really fast. That being said, if it's not Pack-a-Punch, it's completely useless. And if you're going to be hanging on to this gun until you get to Pack-a-Punch, you're going to be kind of hampering yourself a little bit because you're only going to have really one viable gun. That being said, sometimes if you die and then come back in a later round and you only have the pistol, you know, it's always a good choice to Pack-a-Punch it. So the M1911 on its own, it would probably be a D or an F tier, honestly, but because its Pack-a-Punch variant is so good, it's going to find itself in the B tier. Up next, we have the ZZ pistol. Now, this is another one that on its own is really not that great. And I would say, actually, you almost never want to use the single CZ pistol, because from the mystery box, you can get the single pistol and also akimbo pistols. When it's akimbo, I think these pistols are actually pretty good. Even unpack-a-punch, they're pretty decent in the earlier rounds. And when you do pack-a-punch them, they become fully auto. And they actually feel really good. I think the CZ akimbo pistols, when they're pack-a-punched, is actually really underrated. It's not insane, but I think it's pretty strong, and once again, with pistols, you run pretty fast, so it feels pretty good, and for me, that's good enough to find themselves in the B tier. Up next, we have the Python, which is the Revolver, and honestly, this thing sucks. Whether it's pack-a-punched or unpack-a-punched, I'm sorry, but I want it to be good. I love Magnums, but it is so incredibly bad. Especially unpack-a-punched when you don't have the speeder loader and you reload like one shot at a time. It is so slow. It does like not very much damage. Even when you pack-a-punch it, it's still not that good. You do get the speeder loader with the pack-a-punch, but it's still really not that strong. Honestly, it's probably one of the worst weapons on this list in my opinion. And for that reason, gonna find itself in the F tier. Up next, we have the M14, which is the $500 wall weapon you see alongside the Olympia in all the starter rooms. And honestly, if people are buying a wall weapon in the starter room, it's probably going to be the M14, because the Olympia, well, I'll get into that one later, but not a huge fan. The M14, though, is really not that bad. It's a decently reliable wall weapon early in the game. You know, it's pretty good through, I would say, around 7, 8, maybe even round 9, you can keep using it, but it does fall off pretty hard. The Pack-a-Punch variant is also really nothing special. It does more damage, you know, but you don't really get too much else out of that. Overall, I think this weapon, considering it's only $500, it's going to find itself in the C tier. If it was a box weapon, it'd probably be D tier, but for $500, it's a pretty good and reliable weapon early in the game. Up next, we have the FAL. This is a gun that I think is really strong in multiplayer, but in zombies, it's not the best. It's pretty much to the M14, but just stronger. You know, similar ammo capacity, even similar iron sight, but just more damage, and I think slightly better fire rate with a little bit less recoil. Overall, it's pretty strong. Pack-a-Punch, you know, it's pretty much just the FAL, but a bit stronger. I would say it's just slightly better than the M14 in every way, but it is a box weapon. It's not a wall weapon for $500, so that's going to take a few points off, and it's going to wind itself up in the C tier as well, actually. Up next, we have the M16. Now, this is a pretty well-known wall weapon, especially on Kino. It's one of my favorite go-tos. And overall, as a wall weapon, it's not spectacular, but the fact that it is in a convenient spot in a lot of maps means it's one that I go to a lot because it's really easy to buy ammo for. Again, if this was a box weapon, it really wouldn't be that good, but for $1,200 off the wall, I think it's pretty strong. And when you do pack-a-punch it, it becomes fully auto, and while you burn through ammo pretty quick, I think the Pack-a-Punch M16 is pretty strong, and I quite like it, so it's going to find itself in the A tier. Up next, we have the Galil. Honestly, another really strong assault rifle. This weapon has insane headshot multipliers. If you aim for the head with the Galil, you just tear zombies apart. It is insane. Pack-a-punch or unpack-a-punch, I think the Galil is one of the stronger assault rifles. Definitely going to find itself in a very solid A tier. Up next, we have the AUG. Once again, another really strong assault rifle. I will say this thing has a bit higher fire rate than the Galil, so you're going to burn through your ammo pretty quickly, but once again, AUG Pack-a-punch or unpack-a-punch, I think it's really strong. Going to find itself in the A tier as well. Up next, we have the Commando. Now, whether you're playing multiplayer or zombies, I think the Commando is one of the best assault rifles in the game. It's definitely probably my favorite one to use. It looks cool, it feels good to use, and honestly, when you pack-a-punch it as well, it turns into the Predator. It just sounds awesome and looks awesome, and does great damage, doesn't burn through your ammo too quickly. Super fast reload time on the Commando as well. Just overall, a fantastic weapon. Really no downsides to using this. I can't really think of any negatives to the Commando, so rightfully so, going to find itself in the S tier. Up next, we have the Hamas, which is one of the terrors of multiplayer, but in zombies, I don't think it's too strong. It does good damage, really high fire rate, but you burn through your ammo really quickly because the fire rate is so high, so unless you're getting a lot of max ammos, or you do have it pack-a-punch for the increased ammo capacity, you're going to burn through your ammo super quickly. That being said, it is still really strong, so it's going to find itself in kind of a low A tier for that. Up next, we have the G11. This is the really goofy looking gun. It basically looks like a big tin can that you're shooting. The reload animation is super weird. You load in like a long skinny magazine from the front. I don't know if this is even based off a real weapon or not. Never seen anything like it in real life. But the G11, 3-round burst weapon, it's honestly not great. The damage I think is slightly more than the M16, but it's really not that strong whether it's pack-a-punched or unpack-a-punched. And for me, G11, it's not the best. Gonna find itself in the C tier as well. Up next, we have the MP5K. This is yet another wall weapon, and a pretty good one early on. Its damage isn't super high, but it's got decent fire rate, decent ammo capacity, and the damage is okay, honestly. A pretty good weapon to use early on. As you get later into the game, you know, the damage kind of falls off a little bit, but overall, it's really strong in the early game for racking up a lot of money, because, you know, early game you typically don't have an easy assault rifle or SMG, but the MP5, it's really good for racking up money. Great one to buy off the wall early, so you know, if it was a box weapon, I would probably put it a little bit lower, but because it's a wall weapon, it's going to find itself in a solid B tier. Up next, we have the PM63, which is another wall weapon SMG, one that honestly I don't see a lot of people go for, and quite frankly, for good reason. I believe the default PM63 only has 20 bullets in its magazine. Now, that being said, its damage is pretty good. It deals good damage, really good headshot multiplier. But you burn through ammo like no tomorrow, and even when you pack-a-punch it, it still doesn't have that much ammo. The damage is insane, and if you have speed cola, you know, and you are in a pinch, you can buy this off the wall and tear through zombies really quickly. But that being said, you're going to be buying ammo off the wall constantly with this gun. It goes through ammo, I would say, probably faster than any other gun on this list. And so while the damage is good, the ammo constraints, they're going to knock it down to a C tier. Up next, we have the MPL. This is another wall weapon. I believe it's on more than one map, but the only map I can think of is 5. It's a pretty common wall weapon in that kind of second room that you get into right next to the elevator. And honestly, on 5, I think it's one of the better wall weapons. This one, like the PM901, has pretty low ammo capacity and really high headshot multiplier. So if you're aiming for the head with the MPL, it is fantastic. You're going to tear through zombies, even unpack-a-punch. It's really strong. Pack-a-punch, I think this thing is pretty viable. I think it's a good pack-a-punch weapon on 5. That being said, similar to the PM63, you do run into ammo issues, but I would say not quite as much. It does have a slightly higher ammo capacity, and the fire rate isn't quite as high, so I personally like the MPL, and for that reason, going to find itself in the B tier. Up next, we have the Spectre. This is a really popular SMG that I see in multiplayer, but in zombies, it's still pretty good as well. It has a nice iron sight, a nice rate of fire, nice ammo capacity, and pretty good damage. The headshot multiplier isn't quite as high as the previous 2 SMGs, but overall, still has really good damage, and, you know, it just feels good to use. Really no complaints about the Spectre. It's just a really well-rounded SMG, and pack-a-punch when you turn it into the Phantom. I believe it gets kind of a weird, 2x reticle sight that I'm not a huge fan of, but overall, it's still pretty strong and, just a really well-rounded SMG. Gonna find itself in the A tier. Up next, we have the AK-74U, which is just another fantastic wall weapon. I believe it's available on the wall on every single map, as far as I know, and it is just really powerful. It's got good rate of fire, good recoil, great iron sight, decent ammo capacity, and it's a wall weapon for $1,200. I would say it's probably the best wall weapon in the game for its price, and Pack-a-Punched, it is just as strong, still feels really good. Honestly, the AK-74U is kind of like the Spectre. It's really well-rounded, does a lot of things well, and for a wall weapon, I mean, you can't ask for much more than that. Really have nothing negative to say about the AK-74U, and one of my favorite weapons to buy, gonna find itself rightfully so in the S tier. Up next, we have the MP40, which is another wall weapon available on some maps, most popularly Kino der Toten. And honestly, it is a great wall weapon on that map. But, you get it in like the 3rd or 4th room, I think, on the wall. And usually, I'll just take my pistol. Sometimes I'll buy an M14, but I'll usually just rush for the MP40 because it is a great weapon. Pack-a-Punched, I will say, it doesn't really get a whole lot stronger. Some weapons really get strong when you Pack-a-Punch them, but the MP40, you're really just buying it for the basic standard wall weapon to use in those rounds. I would say 5 through kind of 15 is when you kind of have to stop using it. But overall, MP40, really good. Decent ammo capacity, a bit slower rate of fire, but it does have a higher damage per shot compared to other SMGs, so the rate of fire is really not a problem. And honestly, you gotta love the MP40. I used the MP40 so much in Call of Duty World at War back in the multiplayer days, and I just love buying this weapon off the wall. Not quite as good as the AK-74, so it's gonna find itself in the A tier. Up next, we're getting into the shotguns, and starting us off, we have the Olympia, which I touched a little bit on before. This is the double barrel shotgun that you can get off the wall for 500 points. Honestly, this thing should stay on the wall because it is really not good. If you're buying a wall weapon in that first room, I highly recommend the M14. I love double barrel shotguns in games, but the Olympia is just, it's not it. So don't buy this gun unless you're, really feeling like you want to try something different. I've even tried Pack-a-Punching this gun, and Pack-a-Punch, it's still terrible. I mean, like, they really needed to buff this thing when it's Pack-a-Punch because the default weapon is bad, and the Pack-a-Punch weapon is still awful. I mean, compared to other Pack-a-Punch weapons, it's probably one of the worst things you could Pack-a-Punch in the game. Pretty much avoid this thing like the plague. Gonna find itself in the F tier. Up next, we have the Stakeout, which is one of the pump shotguns. I guess the only pump shotgun, actually. Overall, it's a pretty good weapon. It's got good damage, good takedown power, and honestly, if you have speed cola, you can get the shots off pretty quick. So I would say it's a pretty good kind of mid-round weapon, something you can use between like round 6 and, maybe 12 and 13, maybe even 14. And honestly, if you Pack-a-Punch it, it's not phenomenal. You pretty much just get more damage, more ammo, and I believe it reloads a little bit faster as well when you Pack-a-Punch it. Overall, the Stakeout, as far as shotguns go, it's pretty good. Nothing phenomenal. Gonna find itself in the B tier though. Up next, we have the Spas 12, which is a really strong shotgun. Semi-auto in this game, and whether Pack-a-Punched or unpack-a-punched, one, you're gonna be burning through your ammo pretty quick because it's semi-auto. That being said, I think the Spas 12 is really strong. Feels good to use, good damage, honestly pretty good range as well as far as shotguns go. And for that reason, gonna find itself in a solid A tier. Up next, we have the HS-10 shotgun. Now, this is another one of these semi-auto shotguns. Honestly, this thing burns through ammo even quicker than the Spas 12. Not necessarily because it shoots much faster, but the ammo capacity in the secondary slots, like your backup ammo, is really low on this gun. I want to say it's only like 36 shots. So honestly, I think on its own, it's not a great weapon. But when you Pack-a-Punch this thing, you get the akimbo shotguns, and that's when things start happening. I mean, your crosshair is huge and the range is really short on the akimbo shotguns, but if there's a ton of zombies coming at you, I mean, there's not much else you would rather have. You can tear through an entire crowd of zombies in like 2 seconds as long as they're close enough. So HS-10 on its own, I would say it's pretty weak, but Pack-a-Punch, it is really strong, and so that's going to kind of average out and land itself in the B tier. Up next, we're getting into the LMGs. First up, we have the HK-21. Now this gun, honestly, it feels pretty good to use. It has a pretty low rate of fire, but the damage is pretty high. That being said, its ammo capacity is not super high. I'm not exactly sure what the magazine count is, but I know it's not super big. That being said, Pack-a-Punch, I think this weapon is actually really strong. You know, it's not the best, but overall, just a pretty solid LMG. I do say, you know, with pretty much all the LMGs, you kind of need speed cola because the reload animations on all of them are relatively slow. But if you have speed cola, I think the HK21 is a pretty viable weapon and gonna find itself in the B tier. Up next, we have the RPK. Pretty similar to the HK21. I would just say it has pretty significantly higher fire rate with a little bit less damage. Overall, you know, similar reload speed, but it's got a pretty nice iron sight. And Pack-a-Punch, I think the RPK, just like the HK21, is a pretty solid weapon. You know, it's not phenomenal, not going to blow you away or anything, but just a pretty solid choice, and it's going to find itself in the B tier as well. Last but not least of the LMGs, we have the M60. Now, I love this weapon. I love the way it sounds. I think it looks cool, sounds cool. I just love the M60. That being said, I don't think it's that strong in zombies for two reasons. One, really low rate of fire and really high recoil. Honestly, like, I don't really complain about recoil for a lot of weapons in zombies because it usually doesn't matter too much, but the M60 really does have pretty high recoil, and so if you're trying to, you know, mow down a bunch of zombies at head level, it can be kind of hard to, like, stick to their heads the whole time. Pack-a-Punch, I think the weapon is pretty strong. The biggest downside for the M60 is the reload speed. Even with speed cola, it is so incredibly slow. I would put this thing in an A tier if it wasn't for the reload speed, but the reload speed honestly makes it pretty much inviable as a weapon. So it's going to land itself in the C tier. I love the M60. I want to put it higher, but the reload speed is just too much of a hamper to overcome. So unfortunately going to have to be in the C tier. Up next, we have the China Lake, which is the grenade launcher. This thing, it's honestly pretty weak. On Pack-a-Punch, I would say it's probably the weakest special weapon in the game that you can find. It's really weak. When you pull the trigger, it still needs to scope in before you fire. You can't hip fire it for some reason. And honestly, the damage is decent in, you know, the early and mid rounds, but you're going to be critting a lot of crawlers, which if that's something that annoys you, you don't want to use a China Lake. That being said, if you do Pack-a-Punch it, I think the Pack-a-Punch China Lake is pretty strong. You know, the reload speed is really slow on Pack-a-Punch. With Pack-a-Punch, you reload all the grenades at once, and you no longer need to scope in order to fire it. So Pack-a-Punch China Lake, I would say pretty strong. On Pack-a-Punch, almost unusable. Gonna land itself in the D tier for that. Up next, we have the Raygun, one of the most famous and recognizable zombies weapons. It was the first specialty zombies weapon released in World at War. I guess along with the flamethrower, you could count that as well. But the Raygun overall, I mean, everybody knows the Raygun. It's great, it's strong, it's super good. Even unpack-a-punched, it's super viable until, you know, rounds like 20, 25. Then at that point, you kind of need to pack-a-punch it. But you pack-a-punch it, this thing is pretty much viable forever. One of the best guns to pack-a-punch. Fast reload speed, feels good to use. Really no complaints about it. Raygun, I mean, it's hard to put it anywhere less than the S tier. Up next, we have the WonderWaffle, which for a lot of people is going to be the strongest weapon in the game. Pack-a-punched or unpack-a-punched, you're going to be one-shotting zombies almost forever. And while the ammo capacity is pretty low, you can kill so many zombies at once that ammo really isn't a huge difference maker. But you know, if you just, you know, don't use it on just one or two zombies, you just wait for a bunch of zombies to build up. Usually you'll profit ammo just from getting random max ammo drops. So the WonderWaffle, pack-a-punched or unpack-a-punched, it's incredibly strong. Alongside the Raygun, it's hard to put it anywhere less than the S tier. Last but not least, we have the Thunder Gun. This thing basically shoots a huge wave of air, or I guess it's supposed to be thunder maybe, I don't know. Honestly, it looks awesome and it feels really good to use. You can blow away like a huge wave of zombies. So it's really strong, really powerful. That being said, the ammo capacity for this thing is a big issue. You don't have a whole lot of ammo in your magazine, and then your backup ammo is really not a whole lot. And so that's where you kind of run into an issue. It's still really strong, but just because the ammo capacity can be such an issue, it's only going to find itself in the A tier. I would say this is probably my favorite gun to use of the specialty weapons, but in terms of usefulness, the ammo can create an issue, but Well, that's my list for the Black Ops 1 Zombies tier list. Let me know your guys' thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed.